Well, hello, everyone. This is Wilson Cole. I'm president of Adams, Evans, and Ross and ELOC Global Partners, which is a parent company that also owns Backdoor Hires and Recruiting and Staffing Solutions. And I am here with our general counsel and lead attorney and lovely daughter, Samantha Cole. Hey, Sam, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Can't complain for a Monday.
It's a Monday all day long. That's not a bad thing. Samantha and I have just done a full webinar on the 5 warning signs, and then there's kind of a bonus pre-warning sign where we go through entire details of kind of how the progression of a company that goes out of business. And I wanted to kind of spend just a moment on this particular video talking about the very first warning sign. And the very first warning sign can be subtle on when a company's not paying. And in my opinion, you need to be prepared for that hurricane, because if you've been in business any amount of time, it's only a matter of time before somebody goes out of business, hits you with bankruptcy, and you're not going to get paid. The trick is to catch it before it gets to that point. And before we get to the warning sign of that first initial, gee, this is a problem, I think you need to be prepared. You kind of need to have an action plan, but you also need to have all of your documentation in order. And Samantha, I know that you typically see them as they're at stage 4 and category 5, but it all links back to this first thing. You know, we just had one where we had a company sued by the name that the client gave us. And then we found out that the debtor actually had a slightly different name, which, lawsuits are not hand grenades. They have to be very precise. So before we mention the first sign, I want to take a step back and talk about how you have to know who you're dealing with. And that's why for the last 30 years, have been talking about get a credit application signed. It's a way to get all of that information. Once it gets passed over into legal, let's talk about those differences in the name and then the legal differences of ABC company and ABCD company, what that means from a legal perspective.
Well, and also if you're dealing with, because I see this a ton, if you're dealing with a large company, make sure it's not a franchise. Because the amount of times, especially on staffing, that we see where it was a franchise of a, global company, and they have no idea who the local entity was, and you can't just go suing every fast food restaurant out there, because even though they all say the same things, they are legally all very different companies in the eyes of the law.
I mean, and as I say, and that's one of the things that I don't think a lot of people understand is that corporations, LLCs, business entities were created to shield individuals from personal liability. Because I would get calls and still get calls all the time, and I have to tell the client it doesn't matter. They say, well, yeah, they shut their business down, but I know where they live. Well, unless you've got a personal guarantee, that owner doesn't owe you the money. It was whatever business entity that was. Now, at that point, that's shutting the not after the horses already get out. It's all, trying to shut the barn door after the barn's burned down and the horses are already gone. But in the preliminary aspect, you need to know who it is that you're dealing with, and that's why the credit application, that is why checking with the Secretary of State. Samantha, and I'm just going to use your perfect example of a franchise. And with this being said, we've had no interaction with McDonald's. They're not a company that's ever come in for collections, but using them just because they're a well-known franchise. So, Sam, all of the documentation says that they're McDonald's. All of the literature says that they're McDonald's, but it's a franchise. So, how does the client find out?
Say, just for our records, we're going to need to know, what are you registered with the state as your LLC?
Okay. So,
I mean, what ends up happening is, using the McDonald's example, you go and type in that into the Secretary of State, you're going to pull up DBAs. There may be 150 in in a couple counties or however many, McDonald's. You're now having to go, okay, and the address usually isn't the address of the location, it's the address of the registered agent.
Mm-hmm.
So you're now having to go, well, so is it Fred Smith's Burger Barn or Jones's Burger Barn, and having to try to figure out, and you see the wrong person, you're turning around and you're getting sued.
Okay. So you say, so yeah, that is something. So, because we've had clients say, well, just sue them both. They don't understand that if you sue both companies and you sue the wrong company, at the very least, you're going to get hung with their, they're going to have a claim for the cost of filing that lawsuit, to their attorney's fees to get it dismissed. And that is where, if you're dealing with if you're a staffing firm, getting a credit application signed, because you need to realize you're not providing staffing. In essence, you're loaning money. If you're a recruiting firm, you need to know who it is that you're dealing with, because we're dealing with one of these national companies right now that have different divisions that are in essence their own LLCs or corporations, and they're playing that, well, it's not us, it's a different division. So you sued the wrong company, because our client had no idea which division they were actually dealing with. But that is why it
also goes into best practices of have related entities in your contract.
Okay, and that is a brilliant point, Samantha. I want to take a half a second. Talk about that in plain English so our clients understand what you're saying.
So if you're dealing with ABC Corporation and that's who you're presenting candidates to, but let's say ABC Corporation's the company up here and they've got this division that handles something and that's XYZ, and you've got this division that's 1, 2, 3. You need to make sure that your contract covers all of them, so that if your candidate is placed in 1, 2, 3 and not hired by the main corporation you thought you were dealing with, if it only lists this corporation, you're not owed a fee legally.
Well, and that's something, and for the clients that aren't going to have the time to know, okay, well, it's ABC company, XYZ company, LMOP company, what you need to have in there is a phrase that says, if our candidate is hired by you or any affiliate, division, related entity, how would that wording be? And this is a generalization. It's not legal advice. I understand that. But what would be a best practices phrase?
Really, related entities.
Okay.
Because that can cover any of those. You could do related and associated entities, because you can also run into if a client of theirs hires the candidate.
Which is one that we have right now. And if you refer our candidate over to a client, you're owed a fee, a referral fee. So that's good. So,
sorry, just as you started discussing divisions, I wanted to be very clear that, because a lot of people don't realize that if it's hired in a different LLC, it's not owed.
That is one thing that I've done this for 30 years, 28 years, 27 years, about 28 years. The debtors
January's 28 years.
28 years, yes, that's right. But Samantha and the company are twins. But my point being is, the debtors have evolved and they've gotten much slicker and they've gotten more sophisticated on how not to pay bills than they were 30 years ago, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. And so that is something, and Samantha and I will do and we'll try to liven it up. I don't know, I'll bring bongos or something to liven up a discussion on, we really need to spend some time with clients, whether it's in some webinar, to where we just break down a best case, best practices agreement on the things that we like to see, because it can be a little dry at times, but it's important enough to know the reason we're constantly talking about it is why you need to be covered, is because we're seeing on the backside that's how debtors are getting out. Let's go.
I think '08 made debtors smarter.
I think '08 made debtors very smart. You had a whole breed, and that's a brilliant statement, is you had a whole generation of companies that had to go into survival mode, and they learned many more tricks that weren't known on how to shift around and protect yourself, which I'm all for. I mean, asset protection is asset protection, but if it's in the hands of someone that's unscrupulous, it's a dangerous thing. But Sam, the number one warning sign that we utilize, that we tell our clients, is if you have a client that you've been doing business with a little while and they're always paying you at 21 days or at 14 days, once they start running 2 or 3 weeks behind, that's your first warning sign that there's a hiccup. Now, is that gee, we had a new billing clerk? Gee, we were waiting for funds to come in from an ABC company that owed us? Understand that is the first feeder band coming off of that storm. And if you have a client that is been paying you like clockwork, and all of a sudden there's a little bit of a hiccup and you see that they are paying you a little slower, one of the risk factors, or one of the risks that we talk about doing, is assuming that you've got a credit application, go back and at that point check those trade references, or very least run a credit application, or run a credit report on that company. If you didn't get 3 trades or a bank, we have a credit screen product that will let you know what they look like. The only caution that I'll give you is on our credit reports, not in Bradstreet's, anybody's credit reports, isn't where they are right now. It's where they were 60 or 90 days ago. There's always that lag. And so sometimes it will show up, sometimes it won't, but that's the first warning sign. Sam, do you have anything additional on that first warning sign, and just making sure that your backside's covered?
Just making sure you know who you're dealing with for if things go weird, because also, side note, because your signature's like this, and granted, that's probably why I've been able to forge it since I was about 10, is you're getting people to sign things.
Yep.
Print your name.
I agree.
I can't tell you, because also, especially if it's a smaller entity, if we're trying to track down who you were dealing with, if we know the person's name, their legal name, we can usually find it on a Secretary of State.
Okay.
And so, but, if they go by, some nickname and it's just a squiggle on a piece of paper, we're not going to be able to figure that out.
Okay.
So know the company and know the person of who you're dealing with.
Well, that goes from there. Sam, I appreciate you joining us, and we'll break down maybe the second and third warning sign in our next issue. As always, thanks for your contribution on that, Samantha.
Sounds good. Bye.